Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for braving the weather and coming to join us this morning for this important breakfast. For any of you who don't know me, my name is Colleen Garlington, and I'm a partner here at Kirkland and Ellis. Kirkland is very proud today to sponsor and host this Family Defense Center annual Mother's Defense Breakfast. I have the joy of being able to introduce my good friend, Diane Redleaf. Diane is at the helm of the Family Defense Center, both as the executive director and as its founder. Diane has been a child and family advocate since she graduated from law school in 1979. She's a former president of the National Coalition for Child Protection Reform, and she has spearheaded major legislative efforts here in the state of Illinois and has also assisted in other areas for reforms to the child welfare system. As a result of her efforts, the DCFS spokesman Ken Marlowe, said, "We have a better, fairer child welfare system in Illinois because of her advocacy." I have had the good fortune of being able to work with Diane, advocating for parents who have had unfair treatment in the child welfare system as a result of mental health issues for either their children or for themselves. Diane has been a great resource for me and has been a great resource for those of us who are truly advocates for better treatment in the system. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Diane Redleaf.
Thank you, Colleen, and thank you all for coming today. I wanted to recognize our co-hosts, and those include Colleen and all the staff. I'd like to thank all the staff at Kirkland who've made this a beautiful breakfast. Helene Snyder, Alyssa Ephraimson, Vicki Rock, Erin Kelly, Ann Quarter, Mary Case Gaskell, and Julie Bauer. And I wanted to especially thank our panelists and Mary Mitchell for joining us today for what I think is going to be a very powerful program. So without much more ado, I also should thank Diana Hansen, B., who's downstairs still, who's our new administrator, and Chris, who helped organize this event on our end. I wanted to mention that we are double videoing and filming this because Stephanie is producing a documentary about her story. So you may see this parts of this in the theater someday, or maybe on TV. We appreciate if you speak up during the questions, so that we can get your voices. So without much more ado, I would like to show you a short video that talks about our work.
It was 12 of the longest days of my life having the kids removed from me.
I once was a victim, but I'm not anymore. They violated my role as the mom.
I'll never be the same, and I don't want the system to ever be the same.
I went to the hospital for depression, and during my stay, I lost the custody of my children. And were given temporary custody to my abuser, somebody that we have a restraining order against. During this process, my children's spiritual and cultural religious practices were violated. They violated my role as the mom, my role as the full custodian of my children. I want people to know my story. I want people to know the discriminations that I faced as a single mom, as a poor mom, as a working class mother, as a Native American woman.
We started realizing that cases involving mothers had some gender discrimination aspect to them. What we were seeing is these stereotypes are taking the place of evidence, that it's pure discrimination.
It takes agencies like these that can give us a voice, that can give us a place to advocate.
The Mother's Defense Project is a special focus of ours. We started looking at the cases and categorizing them based on gender categories. Domestic violence is a big category. Mothers were losing custody of their children or having neglect allegations against them simply because they're victims. Cases involved mothers who not only hadn't done anything wrong, but they were being blamed for the actions of their partner. A third category was mothers with depression, especially postpartum depression, obviously gender specific. Also mothers in extreme poverty, and the last category that we added was teen mothers. When a mother is in one of these categories, and some mothers are in more than one category, the state doesn't need to prove a case. All they need to do, it seemed, was make the allegation. So there you go. We have a neglect adjudication system that relies entirely on stereotypes.
I feel that I'm being heard and understood. I feel like I have a team behind me that sympathizes with my struggle.
I am committed to making the center as successful as a force for justice as it can possibly be. The work we do is so needed. We need our friends to support the work of the Family Defense Center, be a part of our mission of advocating justice for families in the child welfare system.
Oops, I don't want to play it again. Thought I was stopping it. Okay, thank you. So I think that gave you a good flavor of the Mother's Defense Project. We started the project in 2009. This is our third breakfast. And we apply the lens of gender plus discrimination to analyzing the cases that we handle. Today's program is focused on termination of parental rights. And unfortunately, this is an area that if the case gets to the point of termination of parental rights, it's very late in the process. We focus on trying as hard as we can to prevent cases from getting to that point. We do policy work that hopefully aims at stopping the families from ever coming into the system. I have a big victory to report today. Just a couple of days ago, we got DCFS's new proposed rule on the area of injurious environment, which was sweeping in about a third of the caseload. And DCFS, in the new rules that they put forward, is finally recognizing that being a victim of domestic violence is presumptively not child neglect. So we're thrilled to report that. That's a very exciting development for us. So I think we're making tremendous progress, and that would not happen without the help of all of you who support our work and who are engaged and want to learn more and want to participate, and that's fantastic. Also, substance abuse is not a per se category anymore. It's so we're hopeful that with these tools in place, with policies in place, we can continue to advocate for practice to conform to what common sense policies should be. So with that, I'm going to introduce Suzanne Sellers first, and she's going to perform a amazing monologue. Suzanne is one of the most outstanding, courageous, and impressive people I have ever met. I'm very proud to call her my friend. And She's just amazing. And when you have her brief story in the program book, she's overcome substance abuse and other issues in her past. She was clean and sober at the time her parental rights were terminated. She totally transformed her life, and she is a person that any child would be proud to say is my mother. Unfortunately, she wasn't given that opportunity. She did, fortunately, reunite with her children a few years ago as they turned 18. That's not uncommon, by the way. So with that, I'd like to give you Suzanne Sellers for her amazing monologue, which will inspire us through this whole program, I think.
Good morning. Good morning. I can't stand liars. Liars are people who really get under my skin. I've never been quite able to understand why people lie. Maybe people lie because they don't want others to know the real them. Maybe they lie because they've been lying so long that lying has become their calling card. Maybe they lie because the only alternative would be an otherwise meaningless existence. Again, liars really get under my skin. And what makes my dislike of liars so complicated is that I am a liar. Yes, you heard me right. I do lie. And what makes my lies so ridiculous is that the person who I lie to is me. Let me give you an example. I first thought that my first lie was when I told myself that I would get my kids back even after my rights had been terminated. But no, that wasn't the first lie. Maybe the first lie could be when I told myself I could stop smoking crack and that I didn't need help. But no, that wasn't the first lie either. Maybe one of the times that I lied could have been when I said my last boyfriend wasn't really on the down low and he was just only a popular jock amongst guys. But nope, that wasn't my first lie either. My lies began way before then. My lies began back in the 1970s. You know those good old 70s. We used to sing songs like Hot Fun in the Summertime. Yeah, you remember those days, right? I was just a kid back then. I was only 11 years old, and I was climbing trees faster and running faster than any boy that I knew. I even told myself that I could beat the male species at just about anything, which of course was a lie. I had a bald spot in the back of my head back then, and I used to comb my hair over it in a certain way, and I told myself that no one could see it. That too was a lie. Hiding my imperfections and beating boys at just about anything, even then, I knew I would one day be the landlord's son's wife. That was a lie too. I wonder why he didn't marry me. Was it the bald spot or was it the arm wrestling matches? Well, who knows? Well, don't worry. I'm not a boy-beating, crack-smoking, custody-losing liar now. Oh, no. I'm clean. I'm holy. And I am a lady who still lies. Except now I make my lies more productive. I now call my lies ambition. Let me give you an example. For the last decade or so, I've been struggling to pay for a house that I knew I couldn't afford when I moved into it. Why did you get that house, you ask? I got that house because I told myself, I'm going to beat this system, I'm going to get my kids back, and when my kids come home, they will have a place to live. Well, turns out I didn't get my kids back. And so now I get to go home every day to a six-figure ambitious lie that I call mortgage. And how did I think that I would overturn those laws? How else? You go to school, you get educated, maybe even become a politician. That's right. I've at one point had political aspirations. Well, my political aspirations are yet unrealized. So now I have another six-figure ambitious lie that I call student loans. And did I tell you that the third master's degree I'm pursuing is in divinity? Oh, yeah. Not only do I have ambition, I have holy ambition. That's right. My ambition is so holy, I haven't even been on a date in the last 10 years. Why don't I go on dates? I'm keeping myself pure and clean because one day I hope to be an aspiring megachurch preacher. And when you come to my church, I'm not going to lie to you like I've lied to myself for so many years. Why not, maybe, you ask? I'm not going to lie to you because I am as holy can be. And one day, the liar will no longer be me. But don't you judge me, because at least I'm being honest about being a liar. Thank you.
I think that was one of the most honest things I've ever heard. Thank you for being brave enough to share and to make your story public. It's not easy, and you've done a beautiful job of it. So now I wanted to introduce Mary Mitchell. He probably needs no introduction in this group, but we're very honored to have her here to moderate our panel. But before I do introduce her, I also needed to introduce Stephanie, who's our panelist as well. Stephanie is somebody also who I've been privileged to meet through the Family Defense Center. She is a fourth grade teacher, and she herself did not come to the attention of the child welfare system, but her brother did. He had been a successful paralegal in a Chicago law firm who developed a mental health diagnosis after he reached adulthood. His children eventually moved downstate, and because of a substance abuse issue of their mother, they were taken into the DCFS system. And Stephanie, all the while, was trying to get the children out of the system. Unusual situation was that Stephanie persisted, and even though her brother's parental rights were terminated, she prevailed and got counsel, got us involved, and in 2011, the Illinois Supreme Court reviewed the case, 7-0, sent it back for lack of due process, and today Stephanie is the guardian of her nieces. She's been featured on CBS and will be featured in a documentary about this wonderful, amazing story. So with that, let me introduce Mary, who will kick off the panel. She is more than a journalist. She's a voice for people like us, our clients, our community. She's tackled difficult subjects like community violence, sexual abuse, AIDS and HIV in the African American community, and racial attitudes, and she is a renowned advocate for women, exposing sexual abuse in prisons, working to strengthen the laws prohibiting sex by guards with inmates. And her work is especially well known for promoting education and protecting the most vulnerable in our society. So thank you, Mary. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay. So I'm not quite sure how this works. Can you guys hear me from here? Okay. All right, so let me just give you some background about my work in journalism and why I think this is so important that we are all gathered here today. I'm asked, I've been in a business of journalism now for over 20 years, and I'm often asked, well, what stories, if you had to do a story over again, what story would that be? Is there anything that you've written that you regret? Or if you could all take it back, would you take it back? I only have one story that if I had to do it all over again, I would have done differently. And let me tell you what that story is, without naming the person, because I think most of you will remember it. Okay, here's the story. A young woman came to me, and she was very, very distressed about the loss of her son. She was so distressed about the loss of her son that she did everything that she could do to gain custody and get her son back. But unfortunately, everything she did, there was a roadblock. Every time she got a certificate, someone said it wasn't good enough. Every time she did drug dropped and it was clean, someone found a way to say, well, maybe you were taking aspirin or something. Something was in your urine that shouldn't have been there. She did everything. And I knew that she had done everything. But she came up against a system that was hell-bent on making sure she never got that child back again. And because the child had been placed with powerful people in this city, they got away with it. They got away with it. No one said a word in her behalf. There was no Mother's Defense Fund. There was no one to come out, no advocate. No one said a word. And even I failed to be able to tell her story clearly and be an advocate for this woman. And to this day, she did not get custody and does not have custody or guardianship really of her son. Now, what does that mean and why is that important? That is important because that to me set the groundwork for what we're seeing today. If publicly, with all the exposure in a city like Chicago, with all the politicians, with all the advocates and the lawyers, if this one woman can lose her child in the public arena in a city like Chicago, even though she's done everything that was asked of her, what chance do you think a very poor person really has who didn't have a voice? That's what this is about today. We need to know these stories, these young women's stories. We need to understand those stories, because if we don't do anything to stop this now, we're going to continue to have generations of children who are angry. Yeah. Can you imagine learning at 15 or 16 years old that your mom did everything to get you back and no one would listen to her? Can you imagine how children feel who are growing up without the love of their parents, without the mother, without the grandmother, the cousins? Can you imagine what that feels like? This is why it's so important that we come together and support efforts like Mother's Defense, because we have to have a voice on this issue, and your voice is so important. With that, we're going to explore some of the issues that these young women faced in dealing with their families and trying to get custody of their young people out of DCFS. First one, and a big one, is stigmas. We all know what stigmas are, right?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so stigmas drive injustices in the child welfare system. One, because, you know, if you've been a substance abuser, people want to see you always as a substance abuser, right?
That is correct.
Same thing with mental illness. So I'm going to ask Stephanie, your brother, he carried the stigma of mental illness. Can you talk about how these stigmas, particularly mental illness, worked against you, and why you believe the stigmas were unfair to you and the children you were trying to maintain a relationship with?
Okay, sure. Well, mental illness is devastating, and it's my brother had, as Diane mentioned, battled an illness late in life, so he was already an adult. He had a professional career and had been successful, just the nicest gentleman. He even worked for DCFS in the abuse and neglect courtroom of some judge. He could tell you if he were here. But when the onset of the symptoms began, it was difficult for him to do normal things as far as take care of himself and, live independently. So he lived with me, and I would try to get him to take the medicine, just accept this illness, because I knew he had these daughters that would need his support. And so that was the only way. It was a battle to get him to accept that he was ill, but the only thing I could do was say, take this medicine. You have your daughters. You need to get better. And when I would do that, he would listen in. Well, later throughout the illness, when, we learned that his girls were in care, we immediately contacted DCFS because no one had contacted us. Mm-hmm. So we said, we'd like to see the girls. And they called him up and said that his rights were terminated. Now, he's ill, he's foggy, but he's not that ill. So when they told him that, he didn't accept it. It kind of upset him a great deal. So I said, it's okay, we'll hire a lawyer and we'll do our part. We'll show up, we'll show the judge you're current on your child support. It's not an issue, you want to see the kids. I want to see your girls and have a role. But there was, just an unwillingness on the part of DCFS to allow us even into the case at that point. They had terminated his rights and they would not allow us.
So do you think that it was the mental illness, that because he was mentally ill, that was the stigma surrounding mental illness is what drove really the decisions that DCFS was making? Or do you think it's just that they were just uncaring?
It was both. They were definitely uncaring. They didn't understand mental illness. In one instance, they put him on the stand, and when he started going over his professional life and what he had accomplished and property that he owned, they in fact said that, oh, he's not mentally ill, which was really like ludicrous. And so fortunately I had some documents where I had been his guardian at a point. So I was able to dig those out and say, no, we have court, certification here, he's really ill. So that was just unjust. They didn't understand the mental illness. Mm-hmm. There was also an assumption that he had done something wrong because you have the mom who had neglected the children. Then there's this built-in bias that he had also done something untoward and didn't deserve to parent, and I didn't deserve to have a relationship with them. So there were several stigmas. There was a racial stigma, I really believe, because he's African American. Most men, African American men in particular, are thought to be deadbeats and not wanting to father and to parent. So we encountered a lot of stigmas in relation to not just mental illness, but race, gender. His being a father was somehow less important than a mom per se. So there were several instances.
What about the stigma surrounding, Suzanne, about the stigma surrounding drug use? You're a former drug abuser, you got clean, but how did the stigma surrounding drug abuse work against you in your battle to get your children back?
It's sad, but back then, and even to an extent now, our society tends to blame, shame, and want to punish people who are drug abusers. I've done research, and even in my own life experience, medical professionals, DCFS professionals, they can't say who will stay clean, who will use drugs and get clean, or who will use drugs and remain an addict for life. I face that drug addiction stigma heavily, even though drug addiction per se does not infer neglect or abuse. What I mean by that is just because a person uses drugs doesn't mean they abuse their child as a result of that. And that was in my case. So I face the stigma that just because I'm a drug abuser automatically means I'm a child abuser and a child neglector as well. Again, some of us face more than one stigma at a time. And so as you compound the stigmas one on top of the other, you don't have a chance. I'm African American. I'm a woman. I'm a single woman. I've never been married. And all of those played a part. I was poor at the time. I was homeless. So I had 5 or 6 stigmas on me, not just the one drug abuse. They didn't take into account that my children were not abused, that I always left them in proper care when I did go off to use drugs. They didn't take into account the accomplishments that I had made in my life to that point. Mm-hmm. On drugs, I was able to do certain things. I excelled in school, in high school. Actually, Stephanie and I went to the same high school. And yeah. So
it from my experience, and I talk to women at least once a week, someone in your situation or in your situation, at least once a week, I get a phone call. How do you work through the frustrations? Because some of these women are so frustrated, they get on the phone and they rave and they rant and they rant and they rave. And then they say, when I go and talk to my caseworker, they think I'm crazy because and I can hear in their voice, they're raving and ranting. Okay, so, that might be a problem. But how do you work through that frustration? How did you work through the frustration?
Oh, that was really challenging. It was terribly frustrating because I felt really isolated and alone. It was just myself, a school teacher on a school teacher's salary, having to hire and counsel and go through several appeals, which was really costly. And it was just myself at that time and my attorney, who was so competent, love Adele so much. But it was just the two of us. And at one point, and even though we knew we had the law on our side, because in my brother's case, they never served him. They did all of this by default because they said that his whereabouts were unknown, but really, if they had properly found, searched, they would have found him. So it was just Adele and I, and at one point she even said to me, we need help. I need someone. So I said, okay, I'll get on the phone. So I started calling everybody. I don't know who I didn't call. And someone luckily told me about the Family Defense Center. And so that's where I met Diane. And honestly, I'll be honest, I was at that point ready to give up because it was costly. It was time consuming. I'm taking days off my job. I have my own 2 children that I'm responsible for. I love my brother. I love my nieces, but it was just insurmountable, myself against the state. And when Diane and the Family Defense Center agreed to help and file Friends of the Court briefs, it at least relieved me of carrying this weight, everything on myself and my attorney. She felt aided because it was just she alone in the practice. She, it's just Adele and one lawyer. So she had someone that could help with research, someone that could, help her with the brief preparations and things like that. So we felt, really empowered at that point. But prior, we didn't have anyone.
Okay, and Suzanne, what about you? How did you deal with the frustrations of watching, here's a huge agency that basically is standing between you and your children? How did you cope with that?
It was very frustrating for me. Unfortunately, the Family Defense Center wasn't around when my case came about. So I had no help whatsoever. I was totally and completely alone in trying to voice my concerns. The people who I was able to speak to, certain family members, certain friends, they gave a listening ear. I have lifelong friends who I've talked to over the years, and they were able to lend me a listening ear, but unfortunately not able to do anything to help me get my kids back. Speaking to DCFS is like speaking to a brick wall. They don't listen, they don't understand, they're non-caring, and to me it's all financially motivated. So a person with 5 or 6 stigmas like myself, the huge stigma being drug abuse, they just were not buying anything that I was saying.
So do you think this is a result of attitudes and biases or a result of policies that DCFS may have in place? Which one are you thinking?
I definitely think it's both. Yeah. I lost, my parental rights were terminated under a policy named the Adoption and Safe Families Act of 1997. And as it has in the booklet, where DCFS proceeds to termination of parental rights when a situation hasn't been rectified in 9 of 18 months. It takes longer than that sometimes. And even when a person has met that standard, in that case, in my case, I did. That policy became law on July 1st, 1997, and I got clean on September 22nd, 1997. Mm-hmm. So I met the standard. I got clean 2 months after the law was passed and on the books, and still, because of the 5 or 6 stigmas, the attitude, I still had my parental rights terminated.
Diane, I really want to bring you back in the conversation for just a second, because I think this is a very important issue in terms of understanding the background of how that law came into being. I mean, it's like it was a good intention that went really bad. If you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think nationally, the parents, like these parents, like the parents we represent, don't have a voice in the public policy arena. So it's very easy for people to say, well, children need stability, children need permanence, children need finality. And we don't think about what that means for the parent And we don't see children as tied to the parents, but these children are tied to you, and you can't terminate that, actually. So that whole part of the equation, and there's a sort of assumption that when we put children in a, nice adoptive home where the same issues don't apply, or we think they don't apply because they really do. Nobody's immune from having some, the same issues arising in a foster home or in an adoptive home. But we like to think we've solved, the problem. And so the rush for these time limits, it was very hard to oppose. There have been times in, the time that I've been a child advocate and a family advocate where I was one of the few voices saying, wait a minute, let's not rush to, terminate parental rights, put in all these time limits, not think about what it really means for the families. So I think these policies now, what we do about it is we need to come together and fight back and have a voice in the policy-making arenas. So that's really the key.
So, one of the issues about DCFS and having children removed is what happens to children in foster care. A lot of people think, this is a better situation. I can talk about that a little bit because I have 2 children that I adopted, and they both came out of foster care because they were relatives. And I'd rather it was just a point of, they're not going to DCFS, because I know once you get in DCFS, it's almost like the door slams and you can't get them back out. So I made sure I adopted my niece and my nephew. But what happens when you don't have that option, when there's no one there to adopt, there's no family member that can step up? Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, well, it's been really horrific. My nieces, they battled throughout while they were in care, because no one told them that they had their father looking for them. They would try, in a child's voice to ask the caseworkers, or have you talked to my dad or my aunt, have you tried to call them? They would always give them, your dad's in an institution, which they didn't know that, but, they would give them some, placated answer. And they were placed in a home, finally, after bouncing around through many, that they were allowed to be together. And so they just held and clung to each other in that home, which was emotionally abusive, a lot of things that they experienced there. And even now that they're with me, it's still really challenging. When I compare them to my own children that, grew up in a semblance of normalcy. My nieces have difficulties making friends, so even, they've lived with me over a year and a half, they've gone with a friend outside of school once. I literally have to force them to, you will join an after-school activity, you will participate, you will find something, so it's really, really difficult for them to make friends, to form relationships, to trust. My elder niece battles depression. I'm not saying that it's resulting from her experience, because maybe, my family genetics play a part in that with her father being ill, but it definitely didn't help what she experienced. And she will say that sometimes she just thinks about the past and it weighs on her. She can't, stop. So as a result, she has weight issues, so she struggles, with just a healthy self-image, what's a healthy weight. And I try to tell her, you're beautiful. As a matter of fact, she looks like me, so I definitely don't want her to say, you don't look, you look beautiful. But it's difficult, and we're working through it slowly, and But I think, had we had the opportunity earlier, it would have, not been as challenging.
Suzanne, were you able to, how did you deal with the fact that you knew your children were out here, they knew apparently that you were out here? Were you ever able to see them or get visitations? Because that's a major issue too, is that a lot of these parents do not even get proper visitation. They get promises of visitation, but how do you visit your child 1 hour a month? Yes. And form a relationship? Can you talk a little bit about
the visitation is very difficult, because once your parental rights are terminated, then the children are free to be adopted or placed wherever DCFS chooses. And if they're placed in a home where the foster parents or the adoptive parents are not friendly with the birth parents, it causes a difficult situation. In my case, all rights were cut off completely. So when mothers get a 1-hour visit a month, that's a blessing. I didn't get that. I was at the mercy of the people who had my children, and when they felt like it, if they felt like it, good, and if they didn't for several years, that was good too. No one could do anything about it, especially not me. So the separation is just compounded. And then the children are thinking that because you didn't see me for 2 or 3 years, you don't have custody of me anymore. It must be you didn't want me. It must be you didn't care about me, and so now I'm not going to care about you. So I'm dealing with some of those issues as well, now that my children have reached 18. There's 18 years of explaining that I have to do, and a lot of it was out of my control. I was 2 years clean when my rights were terminated. I got clean 2 months after the law took effect in July of 1997.
The amazing thing that's happening here today is that we have strong and articulate voices that can truly say, this happened to me. Despite the stigmas that is attached to this issue, these are strong voices. So I just like you to kind of talk about what did it take for you to be an advocate, to be a voice on this issue?
Well, that's also challenging because it's a personal issue. So, it's okay in some circles to talk about it, but then on a larger scale, it's been a little difficult for me. So, like some of my colleagues at work, they didn't know about this. My dear friends did, but some didn't. And when we did a CBS piece, and when that aired, I had, to face, to talk about it. So, which was a great thing. It forced myself and my nieces to talk about this issue, which I think has been therapeutic and healing for us in a way, to just find our voices, to tell our story, we found support. There's agencies out here, and we've met friends and things that, along the way. So it's a good thing, to talk about, but it's difficult, because there is this whole stereotype of, everyone's family is nuclear and it's set and it's, great, and here's yours. It's fragmented and it's been through this hardship. So that's, can be challenging.
Okay. And you, Suzanne?
Well, I have a different take than Stephanie on that. I'm a very outspoken person. I'm very vocal. I've told everybody I know for the past 18 years. On jobs, I've told them. In personal circles, in families, I've told them. Every single person that has ever heard the voice of Suzanne Sellers knows that DCFS did me wrong. They done me wrong. And I tell it. Yes. And in addition to educating, I call it educating, that's one of my ambitious words. In addition to educating the people that I know about my struggles, I've continued to better myself in the academic arena, to become knowledgeable about these issues. I said, well, those people at DCFS, they got degrees and stuff, so I'm going to go get me some degrees so I can speak their language. And I'm able to do that now. I've also spoken at on the national arena, the National Forum in New York on behalf of Family Defense Center several years ago. I've done research, $100,000 worth of research at the University of Chicago on the Adoption and Safe Families Act of 1997. I've dug into that thing word by word because I want to know, how did they trip me up? How did they suck me into the black hole? Those are some of the things I've done to advocate in the past. Going forward, I will continue to support the Family Defense Center in their endeavors. Again, they were not around when my case was coming to the system. I know personally the person that Mary Mitchell refers to at the beginning of this program. I didn't have that support, so I will now support the Family Defense Center in any way that I can, so that they can get the word out, so that they can continue the legal advocacy that has helped so many families. I will continue the training and education of others in the public arena if I get the opportunity, to let them know that these injustices do exist. These stigmas, they still do exist. And the last thing, which is important, I plan grassroots systemic reform in the area of child welfare. I plan to organize under the umbrella of the Family Defense Center other women, other mothers who have gone through the same struggle that I have. And we will begin to send letters just one at a time to those legislators that I'm not.
We are now at the point in the program that we're going to open up the questions, but before we do that, I want to turn it back to Diane so you can talk a little bit about the policies and practices that the Family Defense Center is offering to help deal with some of these issues.
So the main thing is to focus at the very beginning, from the minute there's a hotline call, to help families to respond, to reach out to people, to help them to know how to respond appropriately, to get services in place when services are needed, to train lawyers to be better lawyers so that they are not just accepting, the status quo themselves or what the judges are saying is the law, but to be able to challenge it when possible. So we're working to build the Illinois network, the national network. There's a lot of exciting things going on nationally. But unfortunately, whenever there is a media story or, a budget cut, prevention hurts, intact family services get cut. The things that actually keep families together are the first things to go. And the idea that we need to keep investigating and we need to keep reporting and everybody should be a hotline reporter. And this is sort of the drumbeat of the continuing the stigma. That's really what it is. It's like blaming and labeling and calling people child abusers who may not be and who don't have access to the system to really change that, is really what we're up against, which is why the media connection is also so important, and the telling the stories from a different point of view.
Okay. And with that, we'd like to open it up to the audience, to you with your questions. Yes.
What can we in this room do to make a difference?
Well, I think that we are eager to be as powerful as we can be. I mean, we've been adding our voices in the legislature and educating legislators. So that's something that everybody can help us with. Everybody has legislators. They've got connections. And just to help provide us forums to talk,
Yes.
Right? Because this is powerful, and we want to spread the word about the mistreatment of mothers and the unfairness.
Right. And one of the things that I can say, just being in the media, is that there just are not enough resources. I mean, one agency, we're the lawyers that are going to work on it and go through the briefs and write the briefs and do the legal work and do the investigations. Where are these people? They got to be, I mean, even if you want to do a pro bono, there's paper involved, there's, equipment involved. We need resources. And I just think that there's not enough resources. Yes.
I'm just wondering, too, can non-legal people donate their time to helping the service one way or another?
Well, I think that telling the stories is something that everyone can do, and we are trying to do that better and better. Sean, do you have a response on that? Like how other people can help tell the stories? Sean is works with us on public relations, so.
Well, there's so many different ways for people to get their voices heard now. There's blogging. I think, there's a lot of, through social media, I think would be a great way to raise awareness. And actually, I just had an idea while I was sitting here. Because I'm like, if the child welfare system is going to be unfair, and we know it's unfair, then I think the federal government should supply a grant to the Family Defense Center to make sure they can hire the lawyers to battle them on the other side. Because if we know, if that system is so broken that we can't fix it, then we need to support the organization that's there to be, you know,
Correct.
to put them in check. And so maybe what we all can do is write our legislators and say, hey, we need to fund this organization. This should be government funded to fight the government agency that's causing so many of the problems and breaking up the families. You guys should have a federal grant. I'm speaking it into existence.
And that's a very good example, because I think that, you know, we have not even begun to examine the link between violence and this issue.
Yes.
And if you have been watching this over the last 20 years, there is a link between what's going on in communities that are impacted by the violence and the policies of DCFS.
Yes.
There's a link between that. But no one's made that connection because, of course, as you said, resources.
Yes.
Yes.
I am Stephanie's sister, and I have a kind of unique perspective because I am also a social worker. I started my career in child welfare working for a private agency, and we had a DCFS contract. And I would have to say, as a social worker, I think one thing we can do is training. Offer your skills, your expertise to agencies like DCFS and private agencies in training for advocacy. Because I would have to say, most of the workers, and I was there, do not really advocate for that mother.
Or child.
They don't. They don't advocate for the mother because their emphasis is on ensuring that the child in placement, doing the visits, so forth and so on. But before rights are terminated, you need to actively go out and talk to that mother, inspire that mother. I have personal stories where I told a mother, young mother, I said, honey, you need to act like the therapist is your best friend. Do whatever you need to do to get your baby back.
Correct.
You open up to that person. They need inspiration. They need hope so that they can do what they need to do and get their children back. The workers need to be pushed oftentimes because they are overloaded. It's an overwhelming job. With court, with case reviews, with visits, with this and that, to advocate for those mothers. So I think that's one thing agencies such as yours can do, is to actively push for training. On the other hand, I was looking at have forums and training with judges. They're the decision makers. And in terms of if you get a good judge, an understanding judge, you have a better chance. And do training, offer your services so that they can expand their perspective. And lastly, unfortunately, a lot of the parents don't have the benefit of private counsel. So they have public defenders who are overwhelmed. So all of those things into consideration, I do really feel we need to advocate more for mothers. But there are other things like trainings with DCFS, with the court, and so forth that would be helpful.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you so much for bringing us into your bubble and sharing your stories with us.
I handle criminal defense, and I can just tell you it's an uneven playing field in the courtroom. In the courtroom, how uneven is the playing field in this area of law? And can you find fair judges who do see the stigmas that DCFS is playing on you? I see you're already the answer. But just one fair judge out there, because they're the ones who sign the paperwork terminating, the rights and all.
If I can answer, I think it's a function of advocacy. As much as anything else. I think the judges, like judges in all the courtrooms, some are good, some are bad, some are very good, and sometimes even the best judges don't have much to work with because the lawyers aren't presenting the arguments, which is where we come in with our lawyer training and improving our legal network and also showing how it can be done, that's, by example.
And I think even when you have, counsel that's bringing the arguments before the judge, a lot of times the court, there is an unwillingness to just to really hear the other side. They're working so closely with the state and with the GALs and all of those people. They seem to be, you know, together, whereas the private counsel or the public defender or whomever, they're on the outside of it. So it was difficult without, you know, I won't say all judges, because obviously the state Supreme Court, we had 7 there, thankfully, but how many get to that level? And without that, you know, we would have, you know, been in the same scenario. So it's really difficult. I couldn't understand when the judge was reading, you know, his ruling in my case or in my brother's case. I'm just like, wow, really? You know, just everything that the state said, no matter what we said, just whatever they said, that's what it was. You know, we properly noticed you, Mr. Crockett, by putting your name in the newspaper. Really? Even though your worker had all this address and all this information and the child support and everything, but your notice was proper. Okay.
Winning the case made a huge difference for the lawyer, because suddenly she's somebody who, when she steps into the courtroom, people listen a little more, because she's just won a case in the Illinois Supreme Court. And, you know, that was a rubber stamp up through the appellate court, too.
Yeah, because she told me going in with the appellate court, you know, don't expect much there. It's similar, you know, they're all, you know, in that district anyway, you know. Same, and it was exactly as she said. Still being outside, I was optimistic, like, no, they're going to read this and they'll see. Yeah, okay. So, but, you know, definitely I think the lawyers and the judges and everyone, you know, can really open their eyes and you know, look into these cases with fresh eyes.
Okay. We have time for one more question? Yes.
Repeal the Adoption and Safe Families Act of 1997. The 20th year anniversary is in 3 years, and if you all will help me to do that, I'd be eternally grateful.
And I would say there are so many policies of DCFS that are punitive over, for example, people get registered in the child abuse register, sometimes wrongly, for up to 50 years. So it can be, even when they're you know, young and have corrected all the conditions, they can still be in that system, and that's a lifelong stigma.
And you know, as a journalist, I would say that when you look at DCFS, if they make a wrong decision, if they leave someone's child, remove someone's child improperly, and then leave that child in a foster care and terminate parental rights, you have taken away that child's childhood. Yeah. You can't give that back. But no one is held accountable. You know, it just happens, oh, well, oops, and everybody moves on. And I think one way that we could begin to deal with this issue is that people are held accountable for these bad decisions. Yes. And that the agency is held accountable.
Yes.
So true.
Okay, with that, we're going to turn it back to Colleen, and thank you so much for your participation.
So I have a few quick closing comments. So first of all, thank you, Mary, Suzanne, Stephanie, Diane, for a very informative program. This has been, I hope it's been eye-opening for everyone. I first became involved with the Family Defense Center a few years ago, and since that time I've taken on 5 cases. The cases that I've taken on are all cases that involve mental health issues. And all of the issues that have been discussed today are all issues that I have seen arise. It was quite eye-opening for me the last few years that I've been working with the Family Defense Center to see what the real issues are, and the issues are those that have been identified. There's issues of resources, absolutely. There's issues of vague laws that are not, they don't give the kind of guidance that is needed to make these sorts of decisions. There are definitely issues of stigmas, because as soon as people hear that DCFS is involved, as soon as they hear that there's mental illness, they automatically think, well, this is an unfit parent. Each of the 5 cases that I've took on were cases where we had mothers who wanted to be with their children, children who wanted to be with their mothers. 2 or 3 of the cases that I took on involved spouses or fathers that, had they gotten custody, that would have not been an ideal situation for that child. But because there was a mental health issue that was involved, and because the law was vague, and because the DCFS social worker does not have the training to deal with the mental health issue, does not have the time or the resources to deal with the mental health issue, and because they want to err on the side of caution, if you're put in a situation where you have to make that decision and you don't have enough information, they tend to just say, you know, I have an issue here where there's some odd behavior, I have an issue where there's been a complaint, and I'm just going to go ahead and say that this is an environment that is unhealthy for the child. And what happens? The mother's name, the child can be removed from the parent, from the mother. The mother's name goes on a list somewhere, as Diane was mentioning. That mother then, if she's going to apply for a job, one of the mothers I had was a nurse who was working with the care of her mentally ill child, working according to a plan put together by a therapist and a psychologist, doing what she was told to do, and yet her name went on a list. She couldn't get another job in her field. She had to fight this through the system, and it's an issue of resources. So I say all of this because I want to make sure that people understand that there is an issue of unfairness in the treatment of these parents. The Family Defense Center is a great organization, but it's an organization that needs support. So I would encourage those of you who are in this room that have heard these stories, that care about these stories, to get involved in whatever ways that fit or suit you. If you're an attorney, I can tell you these are the most rewarding cases. I am still friends with some of those mothers, have met the children in some of the cases, and I can honestly say I have not done anything else in my career that's been as rewarding as these cases. And I would also encourage those of you who are not attorneys to reach out to the Family Defense Center and see what else, there is that you can do to help, because it's a great organization. With that, I would like to again thank each of the speakers. I'd like to thank Diane, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming out on this miserable morning to listen to this important speech.
Thank you.